Welcome back to the 90% Healthy podcast. Today's episode will touch a lot of hearts, I think, because whether you have a child or you want to have a child and have them engage in sports, this is an episode that you will want to listen to all the way through, because Don has been on both sides of the end of being the athlete and also being the father of an athlete. So we want to talk about what it's like to parent athletes. And Don, kick us off. Why is it an important matter to talk about in a world where it might not get as much attention as it needs to?
Well, our challenge is, and Klaudia, we've talked about this, and I think probably every podcast we've done leading up to this, is that we live in environments that are limiting our ability to move or limiting our willingness to move. So we need to program movement into our lives, and we typically call that exercise, and that's good, but you've got to be creative. But when we're young, one of our main forms of exercise is engaging in sports in school, sports as we come up. Now, the challenge is 70% of kids drop out of organized sports by the time they're 15. Okay. And there's so much data that goes to say what we're doing in sport is not working. There's a ton of that. Okay. And so we have to mindfully approach the process of, if we're going to parent a child in sport, let's make sure that we're doing this right, so this child can finish up their experience with this sport, and perhaps they become a lifetime lover of not just the sport, but of activity. We're recording this on Thursday morning, March the 20th. Before I came in to record this, I was watching in the opening round of the NCAA wrestling tournament, the 2025 wrestling tournament. And I've got texts going back and forth to my old teammates. I've got texts going back and forth to my old teammates in high school. These are lifelong relationships that you establish, and there is a love of the process. When I before I started watching wrestling today, I got my workout in. We are in northern Indiana today. We had a weather front come through, so I couldn't work out outside. I normally work out outside my RV. Well, and for those of you that don't know, I live in an RV, and my wife and I travel nomadically full time. But we've got it set up. But I was riding on my indoor bike ergometer, thinking about wrestling. I mean, it's been a big part of my life, and I haven't stepped on a wrestling mat to actually wrestle in probably a decade. I teach occasionally. I guess the last time I actually stepped on a wrestling mat would have been 2019. So it's not been quite a decade yet. I got to go work out with my nephew when he was in Florida. But if it's done correctly, you develop a love of the sport. You develop a love of the activity. And I think
yes,
versus 70% of the kids who drop out by 15 don't want anything to do with it. And I think from a parental standpoint, this is what we want to get to.
100%. And I think it's sports down the road, if it's done correctly and if it's done long term, it shapes the child's identity growing into adolescence, growing into adulthood.
Huge lessons. Yeah.
You will always be a wrestler. I will always be a dancer, an acrobatic dancer, even though I haven't stepped on a mat for 15 years.
Right.
But still, it shapes who you are and how you identify as somebody who is into sports. And today, I really want to hone in on understanding what are some of the right ways. How are we finding balance between supporting our child and not putting so much pressure on them that, like you said, they quit? And also, how does it look like? What is their physical and mental development is for young athletes? How do we keep them healthy, engaged, and really resilient, so they grow with the sport and don't feel like this is something they have to do, but they want to do it.
Right. Right.
Because it is very, I think in part when it becomes a, you must go to practice, you must do this, you must win, it becomes such a trigger for anxiety and stress and ultimately attrition for these young athletes. And the goal should be participation, to having fun, to having this positive experience, and it all depends on how the parent interacting with the child when it comes to this sport. Are they encouraging or are they pushing? There's a huge difference.
Huge difference. And at the end of the day, I would say that it's about the mindset that you establish, that you help your child establish. Okay. That
Yes.
there's sometimes, listen, when my daughter was, she was 5, 6 years old. I forget. I don't think she was in school yet, but her mother and I sat down and we pulled out the rec league. We lived in this little town called Granville, Ohio. It's just outside of Columbus. Great place to raise a kid, and they have a great rec program. And we pulled out the list of recreation things. And again, she's 5 or 6. We said, you got to pick something. We're not, we are a movement family. We are a sports family. You've got to pick something. Well, ironically, my 5 or 6 year old daughter chose wrestling, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And listen, why am I surprised? My office was full of wrestling. I'd been dragging her to wrestling matches over to Ohio State to watch. Um, I didn't have a problem with it. Now, this is before women's wrestling was really starting to it's huge right now. It's one of the fastest growing sports going. Um, but I was very comfortable with my daughter learning to be physical, learning to be able to
Mhm.
manage herself physically. Personally, I think every young woman should learn jujitsu. Okay. I think, and in jujitsu, there's a part of jujitsu, it's called fighting out of the guard, where your opponent, you're on your back, your opponent is between your legs, and it's an incredibly powerful place to learn to fight in jujitsu. But you've got to be willing to pull the person into you. Once you pull them in, you can choke them, tear an airball out. And I don't know how a young woman winds up in a situation where they have someone between their legs and they don't want to be there, but they all deserve the ability to get out of that situation on their own control. That's why I think every young woman should learn jujitsu. And when Jacqueline decided she wanted to wrestle, I was fine with it. I wanted her to learn to be comfortable, because every once in a while you got to pull them in. You got to get that. You got to pull them in. Now, once you have them in, you can grab a collar and choke. You can grab an elbow and lock it out. There's a lot of things you can do. You can be very powerful in that place. And I don't care if you put yourself in that situation by your own choice, or you were attacked and and put into that situation by force. You deserve the ability to get out. So when she chose that, I didn't have a problem with it. So she wound up wrestling for 3 years. Um, and we were now there. I had two problems with the program. Number one, we had 6, 7, 8 year old kids who had never wrestled before practice for 3 weeks, and they wanted to go to a tournament. And I'm like, no, that's so wrong. It's ridiculous. Me being a sports scientist, if I had my way, we would have wrestled for 6 years and never competed
Mm.
outside of our room. Okay. One of the problems I think we make as parents is we over compete, we overemphasize competition, and we don't emphasize preparation. And Klaudia, we're going to say it 1,000 times, I hope, today. At the end of the day, you have to love the sport, but not love
Yeah.
winning. You've got to love preparing. You've got to have the love that you're willing to sacrifice. That's what true love is about, that you're willing to sacrifice yourself for something that you love. And this is what's so important, and what's so important for us to try and get through to our kids, is develop the love of preparing. Um, it's hard.
Sorry, I lost you for a second.
But
I
we're
wanted
back.
to make
Okay.
sure you're back. Okay, so I wanted to, for that to develop, to have that love develop. I'm curious as to whether you did that with your daughter or you've seen that with other young athletes, having their foot in a few different types of sports in order to for them to truly develop this love for something they truly love, as opposed to having just exposure to one sport. Like, do
Right.
not over specialize too early, I think, is something that I'm seeing in this industry, recommending parents to allow your kids to try different types of sports so they can, first of all, it helps with their physical development, having various ways of moving their body, and also for them to get a taste of what it feels like to do soccer, wrestling, basketball, baseball, football, what have you, for girls dancing. So it's just, what do you think about having your child try different stuff or have them be exposed to different sports?
I think the more you expose, the better. Okay, because just
Mhm.
because you were a good basketball player or a dancer doesn't mean your kid's going to love it. Again, that child chose to go into wrestling early, wasn't pushed in; it was her choice. Um, and it was her choice to end it too. And again, she was 3 years in. She got her ass handed to her in a basket one day in practice. And my daughter's an only child. She doesn't have siblings beating the crap out of her all the time. My brothers and I just beat the thunder out of each other on a daily basis. And she didn't have that. But I watched her in practice one day, and she comes off the mat, and her eyes are gigantic, and she's like, I don't know what just happened, but I'm not sure about that. And she came to me, she says, I think I want to explore some other things. I'm like, cool. But she had learned what I wanted. She'd learned to be physical. She learned to finish. So first of all, if we had a rule, if you start, you finish. Okay. Period. End of
Mm.
story. There's no middle ground. Now, I think there can be exceptions to it. If you have a coach or if you have a situation that's toxic and you need to leave a toxic situation, then that's okay. But you don't leave the situation just because they're tired of it or something. Again, if you start, you finish. If everything else is good, you follow that rule. Now, what was funny was I think probably within that week we were at home. Um, a friend of my wife's, she was a dermatologist who played in a women's hockey league, and the conversation was around hockey, and she said Jacqueline should try this. So there. We're starting to play ice hockey, and all I can see is the cash register going off in my head. What is this going to cost me? Cool thing about hockey is that there's tons of used equipment. We got some used skates, we got some used clothes, we got some used, so she could try it. Okay, she loved it. She came off the ice and said, my younger brother played football at Ohio State. He was number 74. And again, we're an Ohio State family. So Jacqueline comes off the ice after her first day at hockey practice. She says, I want a red Ohio State jersey with Moxley across the back and number 74. Now, she wound up playing lacrosse at Ohio State. So she worked her way up through this. We can talk about this. She wanted to be a varsity athlete at Ohio State, played lacrosse there. You know what her number was? 74. Um, that's that's how deep this stuff is. Okay, this is what kids see. This is, it was to the point, and Ohio State's never had a number 74 on the lacrosse team. I mean, those numbers are usually, 1 through 25 or 1 through 40. They're like, oh no one's ever asked for 74 before. But she reflected her uncle, she reflected her dad, she reflected her life. um, she loved it. She loved that kind of work. And that's how we started working our way through. And so we went from ice hockey to field hockey to lacrosse. Um, and I was just trying to do a quick search. I have a friend that's at a professor at the University of Northern Ireland. I'm not sure if he's still there or not, but I was having lunch with him one day, and this is 30 years ago. So this was before, I think, my daughter was probably not born yet or just been born. And we were talking about athletes and preparation and burnout. And he said, Mox, he said, I don't have the data to back this up. He says, but Observationally, what I see is you get a decade from the time you specialize to when you reach burnout. It's about a 10-year period. And I've seen this a lot. Observationally, I see this happen. So I always had that in the back of my head. So Jacqueline, as she developed, she played 2 or 3 sports her entire time. We didn't focus on all 3. We played 3. Now, her big sports were hockey and lacrosse. She was probably a better hockey player than anything, but because of the situation, she was not going to be able to be a D1 hockey player where we were, but she could be a D1 lacrosse player. So, but she played field hockey and lacrosse. She stopped playing travel ice hockey her junior year. We made the decision her sophomore year. She looks at me, she says, I want to play D1. Is it hockey or lacrosse? I said, well, if we're going to play hockey, we've got to get into a different program. The program here in Columbus isn't strong enough for you to be able to play D1, which meant traveling 2 to 3 hours, 2 to 3 days a week each way to get into a program that could, and she said, no, I don't want to do that. So she played hockey one more season with her girlfriends, but then hockey stopped her junior year. And then her senior year, she still continued to play field hockey. But lacrosse was her sport, and that's what she eventually went on to play at a D1 level. So there's tons of data out there that says do not specialize. Okay.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot of pressure on parents from club coaches to specialize. Okay. That club coach benefits when you make the decision to specialize your kid in their program. And you got to make sure what the motivation of the people giving you the recommendation is.
And then how does a parent know what is the difference and where to draw the line between encouragement and involvement, healthy involvement, and micromanagement?
Don't micromanage. Start there.
Yeah.
If you do this, okay, so I'm gonna recommend a couple books. We're going to walk away with a reading list on this one, okay? The first book that I think every parent, anyone raising a child, anyone, is called Mindset by Caroline Dweck, okay? The development of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So my child never went to school, never came home from school, never finished a practice without us reinforcing her willingness to work and how work resulted in benefit. We never told her she was naturally gifted. We never told her she was smart. We told her, look at the success that you're experiencing because of the work that you're doing. And to continue this story, I'll tell you where this came out in real life. So Jacqueline was not an A-level recruit. She was a good athlete, but she was not one of those top-level All-American recruits. But she wanted to go to Ohio State. I didn't realize how badly until she was a junior, but she really wanted to go to Ohio State, and she was not going to take no for an answer. But she eventually, the coach at Ohio State, her sophomore year, says, I don't think you can play here. And she says, now maybe if you do it as a goalie. So Jacqueline went and figured out what it takes to be a goalie. She got better as an offensive player along the way. So that passed. Well, finally, she goes to the coach. The coach, we're at a winning event. She does pretty well. The coach says, okay, let's take a look at this. And the coach invites her to walk on. Big time in our family. I mean, that was a huge invitation for us. And we're walking out of the coach's office. Everybody's bawling. At least all the Moxleys were. And I said, I guess all that hard work paid off. And my daughter looks at me and she says, well, I guess all that hard work's given me the opportunity to do more hard work. And I'm like,
oh, I love that. That is such a wise thing to say. Oh my God.
And it goes back to mindset. It goes back to we worked, and the language that you use with your children is important. And that's why I like Dweck's book so much. It's called Mindset. And There's too many kids today that have a fixed mindset. They think they're born talented, so they don't challenge themselves. Where if you have a growth mindset, you take on the challenges. So I think that's an important part of that.
I think I am gonna have to bring this up, and I know it might hit close to home, but you mentioned language matters, and I do want to point out it's not just the verbal language and the
Oh,
words parents use, but their
right.
nonverbal language matters big time when a
Oh my God.
child is
Yes.
coming to you or is hoping for your support, and even your nonverbals might not show that. Would you
And
care
and
sharing a story?
sure. So we're going to put a link in the show notes to this blog that I wrote. So I think I wrote this in 2016, 2017. Um, and at the time, I was a sports scientist at Ohio State. So I'm working with just amazing athletes. I've got Olympic medalists, I've got national champions, I've got the best of the best, right? Um, and that one night, my wife at the time was a school teacher at the school district next to where we lived. And she said she has some students in a junior high wrestling match, middle school wrestling match. And I thought, oh, this will be cool. I get to go just sit and kind of, instead of dealing with the intensity of NCAA titles and Olympic medals and things like that, it's the root of the sport. It's the beautiful stuff. And we'll put a link in this story that I wrote about this, but we're sitting here watching this, and I see this young kid getting ready to go out and wrestle. And he's obviously nervous, and his dad is the volunteer coach. So his dad is all over the side of the mat and that's what you get at these. I mean, I was my daughter's eighth grade field hockey coach. I was a volunteer seventh grade lacrosse coach. I, it's but we'll talk about the principles of this. I didn't know how to coach field hockey. I had to go watch a bunch of YouTube videos and so forth, but I do know how to coach and I do know how to teach. And I do know there is nothing more valuable than embedding the love of the preparation. And I want to emphasize that. We have to teach our kids to love to prepare. We'll talk about winning and losing, but love to prepare. So I'm watching this kid getting ready to go out to wrestle. It takes no time. He's thrown on his back. His dad's yelling at him, get off your back, get off your back. Worst coaching language in the world. I mean, the kid didn't go to his back because he wanted to. And he winds up getting pinned. Um, Obviously disappointed, shakes hands, walking off the mat. The body language of the father was horrendous. Okay, it's obvious that the father had a lot riding on this. I mean that he had. And while he looks just disgusted, he throws his T-shirt, throws the kid's T-shirt at the kid, and basically pushes the kid off to the team. No engagement, no reinforcement, no
Mhm.
support. Okay, this kid's mother finally. This kid is just devastated. I mean, you can just tell his world is rocked. He finally goes over and just emotionally breaks down in his mom's arms. And the story you'll see I wrote is called Dear Mr. Dad, You Missed Your Chance to Be a Dad. So, regardless of the outcome of the match, our children need to know their parents love them and the
Yeah.
kids need to know and they want to respect. Jacqueline and I have had this conversation many times. My daughter's now a Division I lacrosse coach. She coaches at the University of Pittsburgh. She coached at Northwestern after she finished up. She won a national title. She helped Northwestern win a national title. She's helping Pittsburgh develop into a big team. And we talk about recruiting, and she now recruits parents. Okay, she goes to these showcases and she goes to these tournaments and she watches the parents of the kids and she will actually take kids off the list because of the parents. Okay, she's like, I am not dealing with that, and I am not dealing with that. And you also know because that parent will tell you whether that athlete has a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. It's very clear what is taught, and I think for the listener of this, I hope we get across developing the growth mindset Listen, another book, okay, that I'll throw out there. It's called Flow, The Psychology of the Optimum Experience by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. We'll put a note in the show notes. The An updated version of this is called The Rise of Superman by Stephen Kotler. But flow is that groove, being in the zone, it's that zone of optimal experience. It may not be enjoyable. Okay. Enjoyment's what I get when I put a spoonful of butter pecan ice cream on my tongue and a couple nerves come together and dopamine is released and it's enjoyable. Okay. It's not happiness. Happiness is a calibration issue. Okay. It's enjoyment. You can enjoy yourself while climbing Mount Everest in below zero conditions, the wind blowing. If you make the wrong step, you fall to your death. But if you're in the zone, if you're in the groove, if you're in that spot, there's not a better place to be because the chemicals are ridiculous. It's the best chemical combination we get. You get anandamide, you get dopamine, you get serotonin, you get all of the beauty hormones. Well, kids can experience this if we teach them to focus on the process. If they learn to challenge themselves, losing is good. I call it W's and L's, wins and learning. When you lose, you learn. When you learn, you have something to work on. You learn to get better. And I think this is mindset. Listen, and that's the beauty that comes through. You're exactly right. So that's kind of the thing. I saw it that day. Again, I wrote this and see, I'm gonna get all flustered on this again. I think about my parents and I write about my mom and dad. Love the process. We were farmers. Okay. If you're a farmer and you don't understand love of the process, you're screwed. Okay. Because farming doesn't just, throw seeds and I'll come back 3 months and harvest it. No, it takes time. You got to work it. There's pre-planting, there's planting, there's harvesting. That's the same thing in athletics. You've got to love the process.
And it has to do with a lot of different aspects of life in general. It's really rare that somebody has overnight success. You really have to love the process in order to succeed. And it's same with sports. And I just wanted to put some data behind that you talked about coaches who are just parents who are volunteer coaches. And in researching this topic, I saw that there's a lot of mismanaged training and pressure that happens in the environment of little leagues or high school sport teams, because very small percentage with little leagues is like 20%, and high school coaches, like 80% of them have received formal training, right, which is really low. So a lot of these coaches, volunteer parents, just go off their gut, go off what they think might be right. Like you said, maybe look at some YouTube videos. So it could be very likely that children aren't getting the right type of coaching that would require them to grow into the athlete they could become.
I worked with a sports psychologist extensively in the last 2 years of my career. It changed the way I view this. And one of the lessons they taught me was, if you want to win all the time, schedule competition that sucks. Okay. Someone who is natural isn't competing in the right arena. Okay. You want to be in the arena that challenges you. You want to, as you're developing, losses are good. And the other side of this is that I want to address is my wife, who has a master's degree in early middle childhood development, who's just brilliant. Had I not had her on board, I don't know what would have happened. But she kept saying to me, remember, she has 11 years of experience at life. We have 30. We have a lot more experience than they do. We can't expect them to think like we do. Okay? Let them be kids. But let's help manage the environment for them and let's manage the way we do this. So the other book I want to put out there, if you are coaching females, if you are a female, if you work with females, there is a book that's called Presence by Amy Cootie. If you look up presence and the Wonder Woman pose, there's a TED talk on it. It's excellent. Okay. The book is better. Okay. So we have a society that tends to collapse females. We tend to pressurize them to fold up. We don't teach them to blossom and get the hands on the hips and stick the chest out and do the Wonder Woman thing, And when you look at the physiological data and the psychological data that just comes with that move, it's amazing. And Dr. Cootie talks about this in the book. Again, at the end of the day, it's physiology. It's getting the right hormones. It's lowering the cortisol. It's raising the testosterone. It's getting those key elements, but that comes from love. That comes from the love of preparing. Okay. And anxiety is not bad. If you're going into it's good to be anxious. That's not a bad thing. I mean, if you're going into a match and you're not, or a game or whatever, and you're not anxious, or a performance, if you're a dancer, and you're not a little anxious, probably need to check yourself. But go ahead.
I remember just speaking of anxious. So my background is in acrobatic dancing, and I started that when I was in my, I don't know, not even teens. I must have been like 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And I remember my first and only competition, because I can go into it, but my competition ended because my dad was like, you're not going to be an athlete. You're going to focus on your academia. Okay. So I had one competition and one and only. It was my first and last. And it broke me. It was devastating. But I remember what it felt like to go on stage and do my routine and have everybody cheer on me and just scream and yell. And it was incredible. And it felt like I was in the flow big time. That minute and a half routine on stage, I was anxious. But when I came off stage, I couldn't remember how big of an applause I got. I couldn't remember some of the small things because it's like nothing else mattered. I feel like I stepped into a completely different world, and that's where I was, and I did my thing. And anytime I was on stage after not competing, but just performing with different dance groups, it was very interesting. And no matter how long the piece was, once we got off stage and I tried to remember, I couldn't remember. It's very interesting how
that's the best.
I'm a little anxious to get on there, and I'm just there, and everything else just shuts down. It's a fantastic feeling.
That's flow. Okay, there's 7 characteristics of the flow experience. First is challenging activity that requires skill. The second is what's called merging of action and awareness. If you play golf, you probably shouldn't remember your best golf swings or your best golf strokes. You're in the zone. You've cleared the playing field kind of mentally. So that's how you know you're in the zone. Listen. Life is about flow. Stephen Kotler's gotten to be a friend of mine, mainly because, I'm either going to be my friend or I'm going to have a restraining order because I love the guy. I love what he does so much. His books are amazing. But when we take a look at it, that's when we get it. I don't remember some of my biggest matches. And I had a similar situation, Klaudia. We were wrestling at a tournament down in Florida. It's called the Orange Bowl. And I'm wrestling this guy from University of South Carolina. And first round of the tournament, and I'm really good. My style of wrestling was called upper body wrestling. I had body locks and so forth. And one of my throws was called a full arcing back salto. So we're chest to chest. I lock you up, and then I throw you back over my head. So all of us goes over, and I come out on top. It's pretty. So this guy walks into me. I lock him up, throw him. Can't pin him out of it. He walks into me again. The other side, lock him up, throw him. But this was full arcing, okay. And I pin him in the second one. I'm coming off the mat, and one of my teammates was coaching me on this, and the crowd's going bananas. And I'm like, what is this about? And they're like, and my teammate, Thomas Scove was his name. Thomas looks at me and goes, that was for you. He goes, that throw was ridiculous. So so yeah, there was nothing going on. We were working in the basal ganglia there was no thinking going on there. It was pure reaction. And you can't get there. I'll tell you another story. When I was coaching the field hockey team, we get going. I pull my parents in right before the first game. I said, number one, you are not allowed to yell at the officials. Okay. No one. No, you have, here's what you're allowed to do. You're allowed to tell your kid they're doing a great job. Okay. That's the only thing you're allowed to say to your kid. If there's going to be any communications with the officials, I'll handle that. I said, number two, I don't need you coaching your kid. You've not been at practice up until now. The assistant coach and I will handle that. I want the kids focused on what they're doing because I'm a minimalist coach. Once it starts, I back off. I do little things, awareness kind of things. But I don't, tell them to get off their back is pretty much worthless. So you want to make sure your language is effective. And so, I don't want my kids worrying about what their parents think or what their parents are doing in the stands. And I'll tell you, if you're a parent that acts like this, it's costing your kid opportunity. Okay. Because like I said,
Yeah.
I thought this was going on. Now that I have a daughter that's in the game and doing it, confirmed it. Yeah. If you're a bad parent, it costs your kid opportunity.
I wanted to shift the conversation a little bit toward the other aspect of performance, which is recovery. So we know as adults, and adult athletes, the big ones, they spend skyrocket amount of money on recovery modalities to enhance their recovery, and maybe neglecting. Some parents may neglect the idea that their kids need recovery, and as much as they might not need the greatest tech gadgets, I think just sleep and proper nutrition is
Huge.
non-negotiable in
Huge.
order for the child to have optimal biological development, both mentally and physically, and be able to grow into the athlete that they can become. So what are some of the things that perhaps you and your wife have done with Jacqueline, and what you may recommend to parents to make sure that they are prioritizing recovery, not just performance?
Well, so listen, when you're young, your hormones are optimized. Okay. And so much of recovery is based on hormonal response. Okay. So the great thing is when you're young, all those hormones are there, they're jamming, they're doing good. It's very difficult young to get into an overtrained situation. It's difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's difficult. But stress is not necessarily the physical stress that's the problem. It's the psychological, environmental stress that they've got to get a break from. Okay? And it's important to draw that line. My daughter, again, the language that's come out of her mouth has been hilarious sometimes. So she finished up a field hockey game. She was a sophomore, a junior. They lost the game, and she got in the truck, and she was ticked off, upset, crying. And I'm like, no, we're not going there. We're not crying over a loss in a high school field hockey match. Okay. Now, let me put this in perspective. When she was at Ohio State, they lost to the University of Michigan, the team up north, our arch rivals. This rocked her. And she stood with her head on my shoulder, bawling. I got it.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. You want to be upset over something like this pinnacle event, I'm okay with that. But we're going to keep things in perspective. Okay? And that's what's so important, is perspective and being able to, again, it's not about winning and losing. The question is, what could you have done differently? What would you have done differently? What can you do differently? The other thing that never came out of my mouth until she would get in the car, she might be pissed off about something. I'm like, okay, before you say anything about what went wrong, tell me 3 things you did well. Always. That was always language. Now, that would make her mad as a snake. She did not want to think in those terms. But
No.
now I see her doing it with her kids. I see her using that language with her athletes. Okay, before we focus on the negative, let's reinforce the positive. There's another book out there. It's called Well Done. I'll think about the author in a minute. He also wrote The 1 Minute Manager. But Well Done is catching people doing things right. If you want to teach a killer whale to jump up in the air and jump through a hoop, you don't put a hoop in, and when the killer whale doesn't jump through it, you smack it with a stick. Okay, that's not how you do it, because the whale will eat you. Okay, and so you have that risk. What you do is you put a hoop on the bottom of the pool. When the whale swims across it, you record it. You reward it. You raise the hoop up, and you just keep rewarding, and you do it through reward. If you're trying to house break your dog and it poops in the house and you smack it with the newspaper and throw it out the window, all you do is teach the dog to jump out the window with the newspaper after it has to go to the bathroom. Okay, you've got to reward it for the behavior you're looking for, and we have to be ahead of the game. Absolutely. And love. They have to know that you love that. And again, so the language that goes on there is, I love the effort that you're putting in. I saw you at practice today. I love the fact that you did this, and reward the process. Okay. She knows I love her. Okay. That's never a question. Okay. But for some parents it could be. I mean, I've seen a lot of parents out there where kids are like accessories. They're like furniture or handbags. And so it's important to, we took parenting very seriously. But yeah, making sure they understand the love of preparation. And if you love the preparation, you will sacrifice aspects of your life that interfere with the preparation. If it's a choice, I have one of my favorite pictures of my daughter is her homecoming picture, which is not in a gown, it's in her hockey outfit. She and her girlfriends decided they really wanted to play in this hockey tournament rather than go to homecoming. Well, they got to the hockey tournament, they got their gear on, then they got themselves all made up and dolled up, and they had their hair all done, and they took their homecoming picture in their hockey gear. They sacrificed homecoming because they wanted to participate in this hockey tournament. Okay. And it wasn't, I'm fine with that. That's part of raising that kind of a kid. And I think that's what's really important.
It sounds like a lot of work. And frankly, once I have a child or children, I definitely would want to engage them in sports and in different sports, and kind of allowing them to find their way like you did with Jacqueline, so she can choose what it is that her heart truly desires when it comes to what sport can she truly love and dedicate her time and attention and energy to it, and be excited to wake up and do it despite whether she loses or wins, which is very, very important. And I wanted to, some listeners might be thinking, how does this have to do with 90% healthy? Because we've talked about making people healthy as the listener, but in this case, I think I wanted to draw it closer to raising kids who have the resilience to be strong and still have that buffer room, that 10%, so they can bounce back if they lose. They can bounce back if something doesn't go their way, and still continue going and growing in a way that is resilient and sets them up to success and to enjoy something long term, as opposed to quitting if something doesn't work right away.
Right. So first of all, you have to teach that quitting's not an option. Again, I think we talked about it earlier. If you start, you finish. Now there can always be exceptions. Again, if the environment is toxic. Okay, so again, I wrestled at Ohio State in the early 80s. If you follow wrestling or college sports at all, you'll know that we had a team doctor that committed suicide in 2005. They've now done an extensive investigation, and there was some stuff going on at Ohio. There was some stuff going on there by this doctor that that was inappropriate. Um, I did not have the same experience that some of my teammates did, but as a parent, I want you to know that if you're in sport or dance or any activity, there are predators, okay? And you have to be aware of that. And you want to make sure that your kids are aware of that. If you've got a situation when you're dealing with a predator, shut it down, get out. Okay, you do not tolerate that. Okay, and it happens a lot, Klaudia, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So there are reasons to push the eject button. I'm not. I don't want to minimize that. But at the same time, if you start, you finish. And this would apply to marching band. This would apply to choir. This would apply to, just because it's not going your way doesn't mean we bail out and we hit the eject button and bail out and we go play Nintendo. We learn to adjust. We learn to adapt. We learn to, I think that's what the Navy SEALs are. You learn, and these are the lessons we learn. And this is this thing that sport provides you that you then use later in life. Again, I think you've probably sat in job interviews and talked about what you've learned from dance preparation and being a dancer and how that helped you prepare to be a professional. I know I've used it a million times with my experience, and our kids deserve the ability to be able to tell that story. And again,
Yes.
you just can't hit the eject button when it's not going your way the first time.
So we're coming up on the end. So I just wanted to leave our listeners with something actionable that they can do. Let's say if there's somebody who has a 5-6-year-old child interested in sports, but not sure exactly what they're going to get into, what is the number one thing? What is that 1% shift that you think would be the most important for them to take away from this conversation? So perhaps something you have done with Jacqueline too that they should consider.
So we've talked a lot about it. In the show notes, there's going to be 5 books that we're going to talk about. I think you have to become a student of the game. Become a student. How do you raise that athlete? It's not a stick. It's not a carrot. There's an in between. You become a student of, and this is where mindset comes into play. I can't emphasize this enough. I can't emphasize mindset enough. Can't emphasize presence. There's 2 more books in there that I really recommend. One is called The Talent Code. Where do great athletes, and the other one's called Bounce by Matthew Syed. The Talents Code is, I'm blanking right now. Where did I put that note? Daniel Coyle. Daniel Coyle wrote The Talent Code. Matthew Syed wrote Bounce. All of those books, Mindset, Presence, Talent Code, Bounce, Flow. Okay. All of those had significant contribution to my skill set as a parent to help them. My parents didn't read any of those books. Okay. We grew up on a farm and we survived. I mean, at the end of the day, we survived. But what we knew, Klaudia, is that we were loved. You'll see in the story, you'll see in that story of Dear Mr. Dad. My father was a coal mine. We had a farm that we lived on, but my mom and dad both worked. They worked opposite shifts, so there was always someone home with the kids. And my dad would work afternoon shifts in the coal mine, and I'd have a high school wrestling match, and I'd be getting ready for my match, and my mom would be there, my brothers were there, but all of a sudden, I'm getting ready to go out on the mat, and I'd look down at the end of the gym, and there's my dad. Sorry about that. He had taken... He had taken his lunch break from the coal mine to be able to come. I knew they loved me. I knew there was love in the house. Listen, I did stupid stuff. Okay. And there were penalties. Okay. When you do stuff like that. But at the same time, there was love. Okay. And that's part of the process. Um, so, um, this is key. This is key is to
That's where it
teach
all comes.
and express love.
Yes, because that is one of the most vulnerable expressions someone can give and receive. And children learning that there is love, whether they make a mistake or don't, will encourage them to keep going.
Yeah,
So
no,
I
yeah,
think it,
to want to keep going.
yeah,
Again, the want, the desire to know that if they make that decision, keep on, they're going to have someone right there with them. Um, and
yeah,
that's what kids really want to have is that helping hand, to know that someone's got their back. Um,
yeah.
and you don't display the ability to have someone's back by bitching at officials or yelling at coaches. And this goes on to Klaudia. I saw a national championship coach. They won a national title in their sport. Show me a 3-page letter that a parent wrote them about how good their daughter was. Senior in college.
Mm-hmm.
And parents are still writing these letters. And I'm like, really? And and this coach said, I get one of these a month, sometimes weekly. Parents are so disconnected. Okay. And
Yeah.
this is the challenge that we have.
Yeah, so some of the 1% shifts that I would recommend people to take away from this is be involved but don't micromanage. Show love over anything else and
Yes.
support, and allow for some experimentation for the child to learn to explore what is it that they truly feel like they can be themselves, like they can dedicate their time to.
And become a student. Don't think
And
that God has touched you and given you all the knowledge that you have need and your experience. When I used to teach, the last place I taught in this little school called Urbana in Western Ohio, if you majored in exercise science, you had 7 classes with me. So I knew what you knew by the time you graduated. And I was talking to my kids one day and I said, so most of my kids were varsity athletes at this school. And I'd say, so you're going to finish up your degree, you're going to end competing, you're going to get hired as a coach somewhere. That first practice that you're going to do, what are you going to do in that first practice to try and get them thinking? And I said, I've got a feeling that first practice is going to look a lot like the last practice you did when you finished up as an athlete. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And I said, now let me ask you a question. Who says your coach knows a damn thing about coaching? You got a coach. Who said they knew how to develop a practice plan? I said, you need to become the expert. So as a parent, study up on this. And again, we've given you 5 great references here to start with. If you read those 5, if you read any one of the 5, it'll be a benefit. If you read all 5, it's practically a PhD in parenting as student athlete. So yeah, love your kid and become a student of parenting.
oh yeah, there's a lot of work to do.
It's a lot of work, but
Regardless,
it's
thank
worth it.
you. Yeah, it is worth it, and hopefully one day I'll find out.
There's
Thank you so much,
we
Don,
all
for
have
taking the
different
time.
challenges, we all have different experiences, but at the end of the day, we want our listeners to be able to, if you have that, if you're working your way through it, we just want to be able to give you a little bit of guidance. So thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. Let us know if you have any questions. Be sure to comment and subscribe, and let us know what you think. We'd love to
Yes,
chat
please.
and hear what you want to hear more of too. All right. Thanks so much for watching.
See you, Claudia.
Bye.